Looking for cardboard in a trash can, Derek noticed a group of young people. They were a bit further away and were discussing something animatedly. The woman was wearing a beautiful wedding dress, full of sparkles, and was wildly gesticulating with her hands. Next to her was an equally attractive young man in an expensive suit, who looked Italian. "Those are some lucky people," Derek said to himself, tilting his head to the side. So the homeless man continued his search, while an obsessive thought kept spinning in his head. Sometimes images would pop into Derek's mind, but they never turned into clear memories. They were more like reflections in a whirlwind of emotions, you know? The man ended up on the street due to an unfortunate accident, or rather, his life changed so abruptly that it was now unclear where he came from and who he was. The man was like a ghost among people. Derek had to survive wandering the streets for several years. It was his street friends who came up with the name Derek for him. When he arrived at the shelter, he used to work at a restaurant, doing cleaning there. One fine day, he was kicked out of there without a penny. They even took his documents and threatened that if he went to the police, he would only get into more trouble. What happened next was a kind of fog. He remembers being given a drink by some people and accepting it, and then he woke up in a hospital. An elderly doctor leaned over the patient and said, "You've been poisoned. The dose was almost lethal, but you were lucky. But unfortunately, you still have some serious complications. Your gastrointestinal tract is damaged. Very damaged. Your vision and hearing are affected, and you have partial amnesia. I don't know if your memory will ever come back. But if you continue to drink alcohol, the chance of that happening would be almost zero." After endless medications, when they stood Derek back up, he thought things would return to normal. But his memory never returned. It seemed to the man that he used to have a family. Once, however, he couldn't remember anything specific, like his wife's name, or if he had children. So Derek had no choice but to get used to living with a fake name and no memory of his previous life. Gradually, he became a man without a past, and therefore, without a future as well. His entire life was reduced to very basic needs of finding something edible and surviving after finishing his daily routine of dumpster diving. The homeless man looked at the young people once more and went to the recycling point, which he had to reach before it closed, to collect money for his recyclables. He would spend it on some basic food, everything that was enough for a little bread and maybe a little cheese, which he loved. Although he occasionally managed to buy canned fish, which was a real treat for the man. After going to the shelter, Derek immediately reported to the homeless leader, Patrick. "This is all I have. I picked up some bread today." "Very well, go rest. Christina's soup is already cooking, so let's take it now," Patrick said, looking at the contents of the bag Derek brought, and some notes in his hands. In response, Derek went to Christina and silently handed her some chocolates. "This is for you. I saved some money and wanted to give you a treat." "Thank you, dear, you are so kind. What would I do without you?" The woman smiled and ran her fingers through Derek's thick hair. Christina was cooking dinner on a fire and some of the smoke went into an improvised chimney. But most of it just filled the room, making everyone seem to be performing some kind of ritual. But the homeless were used to it, because the warm smoke was still better than cold air. Christina served the soup in cups for her and her friend and sat next to Derek. "Why are you so sad? Is it because you didn't get enough money?" "No, I saw a happy newlywed couple today and it made me feel sorry for myself. I feel like I'm in a swamp. If you get to that point it will suck you in and there's no way out. Have some soup, Derek. You're probably hungry and that's making you too worried. Forget everything. You're where you are and they're where they are. Just live your life. However, you may remember your past at some point, but what will that generate, you know?" "Perfectly. Well, there's no going back," the woman replied, and the man just shrugged. "I don't know. I'd like to remember at least part of it, and then the rest would fall into place. The scars are hurting again, so the weather will probably change for the worse, I don't know." Derek furrowed his brow slightly, placing his hand on his cheek. The newlyweds greeted their guests and then headed for a stroll. Since the weather was good after the photo shoot, the groom suggested going to see his parents. "I'll take a walk for a minute. I need to remind them of something." "Tell me you're not still mad at them?" Looking away to the side, Adele replied with moderation. "No, dear, it's water under the bridge. It's just that the way they reacted to your decisions simply shocked me. I know your parents are against our marriage." Peter asked the driver to stop near the restaurant. "Okay, let's have a drink first. To be honest, I don't understand my family either, but you know they are very opinionated and I hope everything is going well today. I'm so tired of all the wedding planning that I thought I was going crazy, but it seems I managed to keep my sanity, and now we can finally get our marriage certificate." Adele said she was proud and smiled despite the fact that her relationship with her fiancé's parents was very tense. Peter's mother did not approve of her son's choice, and she did not hesitate to express her disapproval, disregarding Adele's presence. "Oh, son, such marriages are never happy. You need to choose a woman from your social position," and Peter's father shared his wife's opinion, and even said he would not attend their wedding, but Peter managed to change his parents' minds about it. Later, sipping a cocktail, each of the newlyweds went to the groom's parents. They arrived 30 minutes later, and while Adele was still sitting in the living room trying to keep calm, Peter was talking quietly with his mother in the kitchen. "I'll be fine, my son. Your father and I have prepared a gift for you. I'm sure you'll remember it for the rest of your lives and you don't have to thank us. It's something from the bottom of our hearts, and it will certainly help set the mood, you know," Mrs. Balak said, looking towards her daughter-in-law. Peter didn't ask what it was, didn't care to be surprised. Gradually, the tension eased a bit, as the groom's mother asked for a private conversation with her daughter-in-law in the kitchen and prepared for the talk. "As you can see, we are not poor and Peter is our only son. So, we want him to have a happy family and a strong marriage." The mother-in-law started the conversation. The poor woman thought she would be reprimanded again, but this time Mrs. Balak continued kindly. "We've decided not to interfere in your family anymore. I won't hide the fact that we didn't like you, and you knew that from the beginning. We were worried that you only cared about Peter's money, but we realized that you're a good person, so don't worry, we won't interfere in the marriage anymore. Also, we've decided to invite an excellent musician to perform at the party. You'll like him." The newlyweds got back in the car and went to get ready for the party. Taking care of them, Mrs. Balak called her husband and whispered something in his ear. Judging by the expression on his face, he was really surprised. Apparently, he didn't agree with his wife's plan, but he didn't dare contradict her. After dinner, Derek decided to take a nap, but suddenly someone pushed him aside. "Hey, buddy, looks like you got a side job," whispered his friend. "They're looking for a musician. You said you could sing. Maybe you can make some money." Who would be looking for a homeless musician? The man thought, but he left the shelter. Soon he saw smartly dressed people. "Well, you need a singer? Aren't there any other artists you could hire? Why resort to the homeless?" Derek rudely asked the well-dressed couple. They were Peter's parents, and this was the gift they decided to give to the newlyweds. After all, they promised to pay for a musician, which is exactly what they're about to do. Realizing that she needed to solve the problem on her own, Mrs. Balak took out several bills from her purse. "I hope this money is enough to convince you that we're serious." With that, he was finding that he was clearly wrong, looking over the bills, this argument. Then the man thought it would be foolish to refuse. The taxi arrived a few minutes later. When Peter's parents had already left by car, they were eager to see their son and his fiancée's reaction. "Ah, this is why we're here. This seems to be the address they told me to take you to," said the taxi driver who stopped near the wedding ceremony location. "I don't know what you did, but they paid a lot for this trip. Thank you. They even told me to come back for you in an hour, okay? Well, good luck to you. I hope they at least feed you there." It's not clear what else is going on here. Mrs. Ballock was already waiting for Derek at the restaurant entrance. Let's go, the guests are already waiting for us. We told them you would play the guitar and everything else. An incredible live performance, so to speak. When the man stepped onto the stage, the guests were surprised to see a clearly homeless musician in front of them. Mouths agape. Soon, disapproving expressions were heard from everyone around the room. But then, without even understanding how it happened, Derek ran his fingers across the strings like a great musician and began to sing. The room froze. There was absolute silence. Only Derek's voice performing a magnificent song was heard. Well, the man didn't understand how he knew it. The words simply came out of his subconscious, and along with the words, clear images came to mind. In a flowery garden, a golden-haired woman with a little girl in her arms. She's laughing, waving at him and saying something. But he can't understand the words, and after the last chord, there were a few seconds of complete silence. Suddenly, the room exploded in thunderous applause. Derek's performance was a sensation that no one could have imagined. A homeless man could have so much talent. Wow! Derek suddenly grabbed his face and began to rub his scar, which started to hurt again. Then Adele, the bride, ran out of the crowd of guests and jumped onto the stage, shouting, "Daddy! Daddy!" She threw herself into the arms of the strange beggar, and he hugged his daughter. Suddenly, something turned the key in his head. Now he could clearly see the image of his family. He had been waiting for this moment for so long. Adele looked closely into the homeless man's eyes and said, "I always knew I would see you again, Daddy. And it's a shame that Mom didn't live long enough to see this happen. If it weren't for that scar under your left eye, I wouldn't have recognized you. Thank you, God." Derek learned from his daughter that his wife, whose name was Maggie, had died in a gas explosion, but she never stopped believing that her husband Derek would come back home one day. Unfortunately, 5 years had passed since he disappeared, and many of his relatives had completely lost faith that they would see him again. Setting aside the guitar, no longer Derek, but Carl took his daughter's face in his warm hands and said, "Thank you, my girl, for not losing hope of seeing me again. I had problems and lost my memory for a long time. All these years, I was trying to remember who I was and where I came from. Mom, is this it? Is this your gift? You wanted to humiliate me? Do you think I didn't notice the attempt to ruin everything? How embarrassing, huh?" The groom's parents had nothing left to do but admit their mistake and apologize to the newlyweds. The wedding party continued, despite the misunderstanding, and the guests even asked Carl to sing a few more songs. Soon after, Adele took her father to her mother's grave. The gray-haired man looked at the engraved inscription and couldn't hold back the tears. There was no going back in time, and nothing could bring his family back, but Carl was grateful for what he had. In the end, he was able to discover who he was and found his beloved daughter, and that made him the happiest man on the face of the earth. A few days later, the man gathered bags of food and went to visit his homeless friends. He told them what happened to him and left the shelter forever. The homeless discussed Derek's story for a long time, and everyone hoped that one day each of them would receive their own miracle.